Closing remarks. Corey Lewandowski from AFP will begin with introductions of the candidates, and then we'll be going right into the question period. Corey.
Great. Kevin, thank you very much, and welcome all for coming today. We are pleased, Americans with Prosperity Foundation and Cornerstone Action is pleased to present to you 3 candidates seeking the Republican nomination for the vacating seat of Senator Judd Gregg of New Hampshire. Starting on my far right, your left, Kelly Ayotte has served for the past 5 years as the first female Attorney General of the state of New Hampshire. She currently resides in Nashua with her husband, her 5-year-old daughter Catherine, and her 2-year-old son Jacob. In the center, businessman Jim Bender. Jim lives in Hollis with his wife Susan. He has been a successful businessman for the last 25 years serving the New Hampshire community, and he has 2 daughters, Jackie and Lauren. And to my immediate right, your far left, is Ovid LaMontagne. He's a native and resident of the city of Manchester. He is currently a partner at Divine Millimet in Manchester, and he resides with his wife, Betty, and they also have 2 daughters, Madeline and Brittany. And with that, we'll begin our debate. James.
Thanks, Corey, and thanks all for showing up. To start this off, let's talk a little bit about what we're doing here. You guys have been running for the race for this office for about a year now. So could you, in just 1 or 2 sentences, just pretty briefly, define what you believe to be the role of a U.S. Senator? Kelly?
I think the foremost role of a U.S. Senator is to uphold the Constitution of the United States, and that is the oath you take as a senator, and I think that has to be the preeminent role of a senator. And then in conjunction with that, representing your constituents and doing what's best for New Hampshire and voting what's best for the United States of America.
Jim?
Well, as Abraham Lincoln once said, America is the last best hope for the world. America has unique responsibilities in the world, and the United States Senate and the Congress have responsibilities to help lead our country and to guide it into the 21st century. We, as Americans, have not had good leadership or stewardship of our economy or our country or this particular role in the world. We've been spending excessively for decades. We're running deficits that are unprecedentedly high. Corruption has reached an all-time high in our government. It spilled out at the seams during this healthcare debate. With after the 41st vote, we had unprecedented corruption. We had budget gimmicks. We had procedural tricks. We had coercion from the White House, and we had bribery on a massive scale. They call it earmarks in Congress. We need to get our government under control, and that is the role of the candidates who are running here today, is to try and bring some sensibility back to Washington. And if we're able to do that, ladies and gentlemen, I think we can get our economy back on track and start growing our way through this and create jobs for New Hampshire. And that's why I'm running for the Senate.
I think the question is, what is the role of the United States Senator?
As you see it.
As I see it. And I think, first of all, the role of the United States Senator is to represent the people of New Hampshire and the state of New Hampshire. You may recall that it used to be, before the 17th Amendment, that the U.S. Senators were actually elected by the legislators of the state, of the respective state. And then we went to a direct election. But I think it's very important that the U.S. Senators see their constituent as the state itself and the people combined, because that wasn't changed. And then in the context of the role of the U.S. Senator is to discharge the functions of the Senate in the context of, for example, providing advice and consent, and the confirmation of judicial appointments, ratifying treaties, working with the Congress, with the House in terms of passing legislation, but all the while representing the people and the state of New Hampshire. And I think that we have got to get back to basics, reverse course in Washington, and reclaim the rightful place of the people as the sovereign, and the Congress as the servant of the people of New Hampshire and this country, and that's what I will do.
Great, thank you. Before we get into the next question, just 2 quick announcements. One is, would ask that if you have your cell phone on you, you just make sure it's either on silent or vibrate, so there are no interruptions while the candidates are speaking. And Corey, you also have 2 quick announcements as well.
Yeah, 2 quick announcements. One, I do want everyone here to know that Bill Binnie was invited today due to a family commitment, and very specifically, his son is graduating from high school today. He was unable to attend, but I don't want you to think that we forgot to include Mr. Binnie in our invitation. The second thing is Kevin and I were informed today that there's another potential candidate in the race for the United States Senate. His name is Gerard Beloin, and he is here today, and we will be sure to include him in all future debates should he file for the U.S. Senate campaign.
Great, thank you. The next question first will be posed to Mr. Bender. In 2008, both of New Hampshire's U.S. senators at the time, each Republican, including one you were seeking to replace, supported the TARP legislation. If you had been senator at the time, would you also have supported this legislation? Why or why not?
No, I'm opposed to TARP. I'm opposed to bailouts. There has to be consequences to failure, and the bankruptcy process exists in America as a cleansing process to take care of that and give these organizations a path forward. I think that TARP is a mistake. I think that one of the things we have to do to reduce our deficits is to return all unused TARP money and unused stimulus money. And in the future, if such an occasion comes up, I would not vote for a federal government bailout. If you do not have consequences for failure, then in the future, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to have more failures, because people will always assume they're going to be bailed out. And so we can't allow that to happen, and so therefore, no, I would not have supported TARP.
There is a role for the government to play when we have failing institutions, whether they're financial institutions or businesses, automobile manufacturing businesses and so forth. And that role is called the bankruptcy court. There's a place for troubled businesses to find a place of safety and reorganization or liquidation can happen. In the course of the financial industry, we still don't know what the causes were, the root causes were of the financial meltdown in 2008. And last year's Congress passed a piece of legislation which did create the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission with a target of December 2010 to tell us what happened. You think the Congress is waiting for that? No, this Congress is ready to pass another 1,500-page mammoth bill to take over the financial industry. We don't need that. We didn't need that with TARP. What we needed to do is apply common sense, measured approach, targeted approach to solving that particular problem, not the mammoth approach that the government took.
I would not have voted for the bailouts. I don't think the government should be in a position of picking winners and losers in the private sector. The private sector, when businesses go forward, we've been built on the foundation. Entrepreneurs start a business. When they succeed, they get the rewards of that, but when you fail, you're also responsible for your actions. I also wouldn't have supported the bailout of insurance companies, and I'll tell you, we're still headed in the wrong direction, because right now they're proposing a bailout of pension funds, and it's absolutely wrong. It takes us in the wrong direction, having government so involved in the private sector, and I think we need to stop that now.
The next question will be directed to Ovid first, and then we'll go right down the line. There's broad agreement from the left and the right that the federal tax code is broken. What is the most meaningful way to tax reform? In other words, if you were elected to the United States Senate, what would you do to reform the existing tax code?
Well, I'm pleased to have the support of Steve Forbes, who was one of the chief proponents of a flat tax, a simpler tax, and I would want to work with Steve Forbes and other like-minded people to bring us into a level of tax simplification. A couple things are worth noting. 47% of Americans don't even pay an income tax. Now, I'm opposed to taxation, generally speaking, but I support a tax that everyone has a chance to pay something towards. We need to have more investors in America. In other words, people who are contributing, because right now 47% of our citizens are in the wagon, not pulling the wagon. They don't have skin in the game. They're going to be like Greece. We're going to be like Greece with our own citizens protesting changes that have to be made. So a flatter, simpler tax, and one that's pro-growth. I would support eliminating the capital gains tax. That alone will inject a whole new economic activity into our economy and pull us out of this recession. Thank you.
I think the first thing we need to do is repeal the tax code, because it is so complicated and you need so many professionals even to do a simple transaction. It's absurd. We repeal it, we replace it with, again, as a simpler, flatter tax code, and one that make sure that we don't spend all of our time employing more our IRS agents, because that's all our tax code does right now, and it takes money from the economy with how much time it takes us to fill out their taxes. So I'd repeal it, flatter, simple tax. And then I'll also say in January, we're going to see tax increases on capital gains, interest, dividends, a reinstatement of the death tax, an increase in personal income tax. We've got to stop all of those tax increases. All that does is take money from our economy that does not go back in to put people to work. And that has to stop, and I think this fall, getting elected, the right senators and congressmen across this country will give us an opportunity to do that. Finally, we have the second highest corporate tax rate in the world, and you wonder why we continue to ship jobs overseas. We have to look at cutting that tax rate too, or we're not going to continue to be competitive.
We have three parallel problems with our government. We have too much taxation, we have too much regulation, and we have too much litigation. And part of the problem, with all due respect to my two colleagues here, is we have a Congress that's nearly 70% lawyers. And that's what they do. They regulate. Now, the IRS is a classic example of overregulation. Do you know that the IRS has 189 different tax forms? How can that possibly make any sense? In addition to the fact that the average American works 4 months a year just to pay their federal tax bill, and some work nearly 6 months a year to pay their tax bill, and then the government goes and spends nearly twice that much each year. We are overregulated. The complex system of our tax code is in itself a tax. It takes people so much time to even figure out how to do their taxes. And we need to make this simpler. Now, there's many ways to make it simpler. A flat tax would certainly be one way, where you exempt all income up to a certain level, and then a flat tax above that level. I think that would be fair, it would be stimulative, and it would let everybody know where they stand without 189 different tax forms and all kinds of gimmicks. So I favor a simpler IRS and actually less regulation throughout our federal government. We are just an overregulated society, and one of the things that holds down our economy is every regulation costs something. It costs something in everything we buy. We've got to bring that to a close. Thank you.
Great. This question will start with Isaiah. When was the last time you shot a gun and why?
Well, Jim, it was a couple of years ago, and I shot it because I did deadly force training in conjunction with the Nashville Police Department. And so I shot at their range and also went through all the physical defense training too, so that I'd have an understanding of that in my role as Attorney General. So that would be the last time.
Well, the last time I shot a gun happened to be with Sue's older brother, Steve. Steve had just gotten a new gun, and we went to one of the sand pits near his home, and we did some target practice. I think what we're getting to here is, what do you think of the Second Amendment? And I like the Second Amendment to the Constitution, which is very simple, it's very explicit. It says the rights of Americans, the rights of citizens to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Completely unambiguous. And you know, we live in a rural state here in New Hampshire, and we just had a terrible incident of why we need to have that in Mount Vernon. A woman was horribly murdered by 3 youths who broke into her house in the middle of the night. It should never be the government that decides how you are able to defend yourself. And I believe in the castle doctrine. I think, you don't want to have to ever pick up a gun in anger or a gun in self-defense, but there are times when you may have to. And so that basic American right must never be infringed by our government.
I think the last time I fired a rifle or a weapon was a firearm was last fall when I was setting my hunting rifle, which is an 8mm Mauser, my grandfather's gun that I inherited from him. And the last time I used it successfully was when I took down a 12.222-pound body in New Hampshire. And actually it was over the main line, making sure I get that straight. If you look at this month's Hawkeye, you'll see half a page ad. That's my first paid advertising. Sorry. With that, we've been a hunting family for 3 generations. I'm proud to be a firearm owner, user, Second Amendment supporter, NRA member for over 20 years, A rating the last time I ran for an office in New Hampshire, I was governor, and I will stand with the people every time and support their right to bear and keep arms.
Thank you all. Understandably, jobs and the economy are issue number one on most people's minds in the upcoming elections. But supporters on both sides of the political spectrum also care about social issues as well. And with that, I would ask, could you please tell us where you stand on the issue of abortion? And further, could you, how much weight would this issue carry when determining the qualifications of someone who has been nominated to the U.S. Supreme Court? And Jim, we'll start with you.
No decent American can be comfortable with the number of abortions that are performed in America. And we want to do everything possible to reduce those number of abortions, starting with education in our schools. You know, young people must know that abortion should not be considered a form of contraception. I'm opposed to federal funding for abortions, and I'm in favor of parental notification in case of youth. However, my basic principle is that the government should not have control of your life and certainly not control your body. And as difficult as a decision as this is for people, it's a decision that must be made between a woman and her doctor. And as far as the Supreme Court, and you know, as a U.S. Senator, this is the one area where you might have an occasion to have an influence on this over the next 6 years. And I would say that as somebody who follows the Constitution and would uphold the Constitution, there are only 4 of the current 9 Supreme Court justices that I would have voted to confirm. And those 4 are Scalia, Alito, Thomas, and Chief Justice Roberts. And the reason for those 4 is that there are only 4, in my view, who have consistently upheld the law and upheld the Constitution. I do not believe that Sonia Sotomayor falls into that category. She's an activist judge. And every one of the other 5, at some point or another, has been an activist judge. So in terms of how does a U.S. Senator impact this issue, it's the confirmation of presidential appointments on judges. And I think that in this view, my conservative credentials would stand up very well.
Thank you.
The Constitution is based on the principles articulated in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. What they didn't write was, but first among these is life. And you are endowed by your Creator at the moment of creation. That is a fundamental right. That is the dominant right. I am pro-life, period. I support a human life amendment that would declare explicitly what I believe the Constitution provides based on the statements of the Declaration of Independence, and that is the right to life begins at the moment of conception. Unfortunately, we have judge-made laws that recognize the so-called right to an abortion, not constitutionally based laws. And lastly, I'm opposed to embryonic stem cell research, and I would certainly want to know of a judicial nominee what their position is on the issue of abortion, because I think it goes to say how they view the Constitution and how they view the Constitution should be interpreted and applied. Thank you.
I'm pro-life. I argued a case also before the United States Supreme Court defending our parental notification law, and at the time when the governor disagreed with my decision. And I argued before that court. I certainly appreciate particularly Chief Justice Roberts and the way that he's handled himself on that court. And in terms of that issue on a Supreme Court nominee, it's something that I would want to know the answer to. But my standard for upholding a Supreme Court nominee will be to look at their qualifications and whether they will uphold the Constitution.
Thank you very much.
Our next question is more of a recent phenomenon, and very specifically it revolves around the April 15 Tea Parties. So my question is, what do you believe the Tea Party movement is all about? Do you represent that movement? And if so, and you were elected to the United States Senate, what would you do to support that movement?
Thank you. Well, Corey, first of all, I want to thank you and your organization for being an important part of the Tea Party movement. There's been a great energy at the grassroots level. I believe the Tea Party is about people reclaiming their rightful place over government. We're not subservient to government. They are supposed to be subservient to us. And Americans across this country and right here in New Hampshire are reclaiming constitutional principles and ideals. And they're people who are not necessarily Republicans, Democrats, Independents, and Libertarians. They're American citizens who want to be free from unreasonable reach of government, who want a government that's responsible. And I'm pleased that on April 15th, there was a straw poll we didn't know was going to take place. And at the end of that straw poll, I had over 90 votes compared to my next competitor, who had 45. And then we had the 9/12 debate, which is all part of the Tea Party movement too, the same energy level. And at the end of that debate in Rochester, I got 61 votes to my nearest competitor who had 16 votes. I believe I am the authentic conservative in this race, the one that people at the Tea Party level are going to gravitate towards, because I believe in freedom, liberty, constitutional principles, and serving you. And that's what I intend to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that we're all part of the Tea Party. I'm absolutely a supporter of the Tea Party. And I have to tell you, in my view, the reason I'm running for United States Senate is I want to stop what's happening right now in Washington. I want to stop the bailouts. I want to stop the out-of-control spending that has given us a $13 trillion debt. I want to stop our country from apologizing for the United States of America. And these are things that I think are very important to the Tea Party. And ultimately, as Americans, we're patriots, we believe in our country, and we believe in the Constitution. I think the Tea Party is such an important movement in this state, in this country, because they've brought what should have always been at the heart of everything we do, which is the Constitution, to everyone's mind, that that is the guiding document for our land. And a belief in a more limited, more accountable government, a belief in personal responsibility, and finally, a belief in individual freedom. And those are things that I believe in. That's why I'm running. And I think the Tea Party is wonderful, and I hope more people come out to Tea Party events.
The original Tea Party in the late 18th century was based on the premise that there be no taxation without representation. And that's really been the spirit of the current Tea Party. Americans all across the country feel that we're overtaxed and we're underrepresented. We have a government that spends too much, that wastes too much, that taxes too much, that borrows too much, and is just way too big. We have a deficit that's gone from 12 trillion to 13 trillion in just over 6 months. Is that amazing? It took us all these years to get to 12 trillion, and then 6 months later we hit 13 trillion. And we're underrepresented because we have congressmen that vote things for themselves that don't apply to the American people, and they vote things to the American people that they exempt themselves from. We need a Congress that's once again public servants. And the last line of the Declaration of Independence, as you all know, said, "We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." Wouldn't it be nice to have a Congress that felt that way again? A Congress that holds the people's interests above their own? A Congress that behaves responsibly with respect to our money? That's what the Tea Party is all about, and it encompasses all of us. Many people in Washington have no idea what the Tea Party is. They view it like the Republican Party or the Democrat Party, but the Tea Party really is a cross-section of all Americans who want better, more responsible government. And that's something I think all of us here believe.
The next senator will also play a large role when it comes to foreign policy. I'm sure you're aware, last weekend the United Nations quickly condemned Israel for acts leading to the loss of life in international waters. If you are elected U.S. Senator, a U.S. Senator, will Israel always be right? Kelly?
Well, I will tell you that Israel, like other countries, has a right to defend itself. And it's always unfortunate when there's any loss of life. But they, in that circumstance, they were stopping arms from coming from Hamas into Gaza. Also, Hamas continues to shoot rockets into Israel, and they're defending themselves. I think we all need to be, whenever there's a loss of life, it's very tragic, but we have to respect Israel's right to defend itself. And I will absolutely evaluate every situation on its facts and its merits. And ultimately, when it comes to our national security, I have a fundamental disagreement with the administration right now. And that is that they are failing to stand with our allies, and they are trying to appease our enemies. And it is the wrong policy, and I said it before and I'll say it again, I don't think we should ever apologize to the United States of America. And we need to, when it comes to foreign policy, to stand up for freedom and democracy as well. And when it comes to the people in Iran, when they were protesting in the streets, we should have been saying, we are with you. We believe in democracy and freedom, and we know that all you want is the freedom that we have and love in this country. And I think that this president and this administration needs to take a very different tact when it comes to national security. And if I have the privilege of serving our state, I'm going to ask the hard questions when it comes to those issues. And I'm also going to ask the hard questions when it comes to terrorists, because there are still terrorists who want to kill us. And unfortunately, they are enemies of our country. It's not a man-made disaster. And I think we need to be in a position where we can protect our country from terrorists and acknowledge who they are and make sure that we have the best information to prevent future attacks.
No one can say any country will always be in the right. Good people try to be in the right and try to act in the best interest of their people and in an ethical manner. In this case, Israel was well within its rights to do what it did, and I think that it's getting a bad rap from certain people in our administration. We live in a very difficult time, and there's a widening gulf right now since in the past 18 months in the Obama administration. There's a widening gulf between the American government and all of our allies, whether it be Britain, Israel, Japan, South Korea. The gulf between America and our allies is getting deeper and wider, just as it is between all American citizens and the government. We citizens don't trust our government the way we used to. And our government has not always acted in a trustworthy manner. You know, America has responsibilities, a unique role in the world. There are at least a dozen hotspots that require American intervention and American influence. From nuclear proliferation in North Korea and Iran, to the war on terrorism in Afghanistan and Iraq, the decades-old conflict between Israel and some of its neighbors that would prefer that Israel not be allowed to exist. We have a number of things that require American influence, and America can't do any of these things by themselves. We have to do it in conjunction with our allies. And so it's very, very important that we act responsibly toward our allies, and we support our allies, especially when they're right. And in this case, Israel was well within its rights to do what it had to do to defend its country, and it's unfortunate that our administration has treated them so poorly.
James, I think you asked the question whether or not Israel is always right. And in matters of foreign affairs, international relations, no country is always right, except the United States of America, as far as I'm concerned. Now, having said that, in the context of Israel, let's recognize a couple of basic things which contextualizes the answer. Israel is the only authentic democratic country in a very troubled region of the world. And I say that because that is their tradition. Democracy is in the DNA of the Israeli people. They believe in self-governance. They share so much of the same common values we do, and they do it authentically, not because they were browbeaten to it. We have to recognize that. That is such an important dynamic between the United States and Israel. They are fundamentally democratic like we are, in a very troubled region of the world. They acted within their rights, certainly, to protect themselves against the Gaza flotilla, which appears to be nothing more than a Trojan horse for those folks. They had people there who were terrorists in those boats, wanted to do them harm, and they were within their rights to protect themselves in international waters within their boundaries. And the people coming across were forewarned. And we should support Israel. We should not apologize for it or turn away the Prime Minister of Israel when he visits the White House. Can you believe the President did that? And yet he lets the President of Mexico denounce the people of Arizona. Denounce them. And then he goes to Congress to do the same thing without a word of objection. We've got to change course in Washington and make sure we have our priorities straight. And our priorities when it comes to the Middle East is to stand with Israel.
Thank you. The second question on the social issues. As you know, last year, New Hampshire legalized gay marriage. Can you please tell us your position on gay marriage? And if elected U.S. Senator, Would you support or oppose upholding the Federal Defense of Marriage Act? Jim?
I would not vote to undo the Defense of Marriage Act. Marriage is between a man and a woman, and and to undo this act would undermine a lot of state law. So no, I would not vote to undo that.
I'm a federalist. I believe in states' rights, except to the extent the Constitution provides for an express delegation of authority to the federal government. And as the 10th Amendment provides, all other rights, powers, liberties are reserved to the states and the people. Number one. Secondly, in the Constitution, the Fair Faith and Credit Clause provides that one state will respect the laws of another, except to the extent regulated by the Congress. The Congress under President Clinton's administration passed the Defense of Marriage Act in order to respect the rights of each state to define for itself what marriage should be. Marriage should be between a man and a woman. Period. End of story. That's my personal view. That's the view I wish New Hampshire held. I don't want New Hampshire's laws to affect another state's laws. And I'll support people here in New Hampshire who want to restore marriage to its original intent. I would support a constitutional amendment to define marriage in our nation as between a man and a woman. But short of that, I would stand with the Defense of Marriage Act and let the states make the decision for themselves and not interrupt, displace, undermine the definition of marriage in the states in which the people find themselves.
I absolutely support and believe in marriage as between a man and a woman. And I do think it's unfortunate that our state has made a different decision on that. And I know that many of you who are out there working at the state level, running for state office, I commend your efforts to repeal that law here in the state of New Hampshire. And I think that's very important. I do not think that we should overturn DOMA, because absolutely for states to decide marriage, we don't want one state's decision impacting another state's. And so I would vote against any repeal of DOMA because of that. And I wish you all well and would love to help in any effort to get our law back on the right place on this.
Thank you. The next topic is going to be the topic of health care. I'm sure you're all aware that recently a massive health care bill, which consumes approximately 16% of our annual economy, has passed both the House and Senate, and the President hailed it as a historic piece of legislation. Very specifically, if you are elected to the United States Senate, you will be asked countless number of times to vote on different implementation portions of this piece of legislation. Have you read the bill, and how will you work to edit this bill? Two-part question, please.
Thank you. I think the bill started off as 2,405 pages and until it went to 2,700 pages because the Congress added nationalizing student loan programs to health care. Does that make sense to you? I don't think so. It wouldn't happen in New Hampshire because we don't believe in non-germane amendments being attached. I have not read the entire bill. I'm glad I didn't, frankly, but I did research it. And you know, you can find the Cornhusker kickback in that bill, the original Senate bill. If you do a search of Nebraska, you'll find it. I think it's page 2105. Test me on this one. 3 lines. Exempting Nebraska from the expense of Medicaid. This bill was wrong as a matter of policy. It's wrong as a matter of procedure. People were bribed to vote for that bill. They shouldn't have been. That's not the way the Congress should function. And the Congress has no role in nationalizing health care. It's not a constitutionally delegated authority or power, any more than education is. I would oppose the implementation steps for this bill. I would work to repeal it. And in the meantime, support pro-growth, pro-competitive market forces for health care. How many of us choose to purchase health care services on the basis of cost and quality? Not too many of us, because our system isn't designed that way. We need to bring market forces to bear so that people can make an educated decision about their health care services, and one that will lead to higher quality and lower costs. But that's not by a one-size-fits-all approach. Paul Hodes is wrong. He's dead wrong in this bill. He called the people who opposed the original House bill members of the Flat Earth Society. I'm looking around this room, I guess we're all members of the Flat Earth Society. He's contemptuous of us. He's the wrong kind of senator for New Hampshire. He'll support this bill. He'll fight for federal funding of abortions and a public option. We need to make sure Paul Hodes doesn't win. I'm the best chance to fight him, not only in the debate, but to beat him in the election cycle, because I present the strongest contrast with Paul Hodes on all the issues, especially this one. I practice law in healthcare. I know a little bit about healthcare. I can make a difference in Washington on it.
Thank you. Kelly?
I have read portions of the bill, but not all 2,400 or 2,900 paid, whichever number it ended up on, 2,750. I will tell you that, number one, it needs to be repealed. It needs to be repealed because fundamentally it's the wrong philosophy. It is creating another entitlement that we can't sustain. We're now in a position where we got a report from CBO a few weeks ago that talks about how this is going to add to our deficit. Well, all of us knew that up front when we knew that they were using 10 years of revenue to pay for 6 years of health care. You know, the math didn't add up, but finally the CBO has told us that. Don't you think that's information that our representatives should have had before they voted on the bill? And now we've had CMS come out and say we're going to see premium increases under the bill. Don't you think that that's the kind of information that our representatives should have demanded before they voted on the bill? I mean, that's doing your homework, but this is a bill that's not only unconstitutional, and I commend the 20 states that are challenging it, because I don't think it's proper for the federal government to dictate to states and individuals that you have to purchase a particular product, or small businesses what they have to do. But also, it does all the wrong things. We can't sustain it under our deficit. It comes between us and our physicians, and it increases premiums, so it hurts our small businesses here in New Hampshire. And any reforms we have shouldn't be growing government. They should be opening up the market for insurance across state lines, allowing small businesses to pull together, and tort reform, so that we have an appropriate litigation system that doesn't require our doctors to practice defensive medicine. But this is a very important issue for our next United States Senator, because many of the most onerous provisions go into effect in 2014. So we need to keep this fight up and absolutely being committed to repeal this, so that we don't have this as an albatross around our neck going forward.
This health care bill was not about improving accessibility to health care, and it was not about lowering the cost of health care. What it was really about is gaining greater control over your lives from cradle to grave. That's what the whole last year has been about. And I did read the health care bill during the weekend of October 18th and 19th of last year. At the time, I remember well, the bill was 1,018 pages. And Representative Conyers of Michigan had just made a very infamous quote, and he said, "No, I hadn't read the health care bill. It would take me 2 weeks and 2 lawyers to even understand what it says." Implicitly saying that my 2 weeks of my time is worth more than the trillions of dollars of your money that I'm going to spend. So I did read it that weekend. By Christmas time, it had ballooned to 2,000 pages. And that was the bill that was passed in 2 different versions by the House and the Senate of our Congress. Then Scott Brown got elected, the 41st vote, and we thought, hallelujah, we'll be able to slow down this runaway train to socialism. But what did we see? We saw procedural tricks, we saw budget gimmicks, we saw unprecedented coercion of congressmen from the White House, and we saw bribery on a massive scale. Now, our Congress has never been full of scouts, but all of a sudden corruption is just spilling out of the seams. And we've got to stop this. It's just not right. The bill that was passed is 2,750 pages. That's 5.5 reams of paper. It's about this big. What that is that big could possibly make sense? The document we've been governing our country with for 231 years is 15 typewritten pages. Why should our Congress never be able to pass anything that's less than 1,000 pages? This just can't be good governance, and none of them have read it. There isn't one person in our Congress that's read this bill that they've signed, and believe me, there's not one person anywhere that understands how it will be implemented. This is bad thinking from start to finish, And it's one of the reasons why we need different types of leaders in Washington.
Thank you.
Bit of a personal question. Our last 3 Republican U.S. senators were elected and then moved full-time to Washington. If you're elected, will you do the same thing? Kelly?
Who's up?
Kelly?
I'm not moving to Washington. That was a really important decision for us as a family, even before I made the decision to run for United States Senate. The reason is because, first of all, I want to stay here, grounded in New Hampshire. And you know what? Where I get the best feedback is when I'm at the grocery store, and I get it now as a candidate. I'm out shopping at the grocery store, and people in New Hampshire talk to me all the time about what's on their mind, what they're angry about, and that's the type of senator I want to be. We're blessed to have tremendous family support, Joe and I, and they're all in New Hampshire. We have deep roots here, and I don't plan to move anywhere. I'm going to go down there, commute, and come back. And we live within 5 miles of 50 family members, so I'm not leaving that, nor is my family.
Well, Sue and I are blessed that our children are both adults and they're both independent. And our plan will be to have a second residence in Washington, D.C. Because I don't think this is a 9-to-5 job. I think there's going to be many nights when you have to stay well beyond what you could be able to predict. And so in order to do the best job we can, our view is that we'll have a second residence in Washington, D.C. That's not to say we're not going to spend a lot of time in New Hampshire. We love New Hampshire. Sue and I have lived here for 24 years. We think it's the best possible place to live, to raise a family, and also to develop a business. And I've been trying to advocate that to friends of mine who run large businesses in other nearby states, because I think ultimately this is our best short-term path to improved employment. I'm diverting on this question a little bit, but we will be spending plenty of time in New Hampshire, but we also need the flexibility to also be able to spend as much time as needed in Washington.
Are you kidding? You don't want to go to Washington. This is not the time to go to Washington, Jim. This is the time to be with the people of New Hampshire. And you go to Washington when the session opens on Tuesday morning, and you come back when it closes on Thursday, and you get back home. You get back home with the people. This has been a cornerstone of my campaign. I live in Manchester, so it's easy for me to run down the road, get on a plane, fly over to Washington in an hour, give or take a few minutes. Get on the metro, go to the Union Station, get off, and then go to work, and then hopefully find some place to bunk. But I am not living there. I do not want to go to Washington and become part of the problem that we're seeing right now. Washington is a corrupting place because they've got over 3,000 lobbyists who are all more than interested in taking you out to dinner, seeing you afterwards for caviar, whatever the heck they serve down there. I don't even. I used to work in the United States Senate Post Office when I was in college, delivering mail. I know what that place is like, from the inside out. I want to stay in New Hampshire as long as I can. With the technology the way it is now, Skype and internet and all, you can have direct communication with anyone from New Hampshire. We're not a backwater state at all. I am not moving to New Hampshire. You can count on that. And we'll continue to work together after the election to serve the people of New Hampshire. Thank you.
Boy, that one got you more worked up than any of those. Well, you know, I like to sleep in my own bed. I don't like hotels.
Come back home to New Hampshire. Come back home to New Hampshire.
All right. Now let me get that settled.
Okay, I'm with you on that.
Thank you. Let's get some more boards.
Boy, I didn't figure this was the issue we were going to be disagreeing.
Keep it up, it's more fun.
Leave it to Pindle. We never know what it is. There's been much discussion recently over the newly enacted law by the state of Arizona in an effort to crack down on illegal immigration in that state. Do you support the actions taken by the state of Arizona by enacting this law? And further, what more should the federal government be doing in this area? Jen?
Yes, I do support the law in Arizona. The primary responsibility of our federal government is to protect America and to protect American lives, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and also protect American property. That also happens to be the responsibility of the governor of each state. We've got to secure our borders. We've got to crack down hard on illegal immigration. We've got to make sure that illegal immigrants can't find employment. We've got to crack down hard on employers who hire illegal immigrants. Every state of our nation is now a border state. And the cost of not enforcing our borders is many times more than the cost of effectively enforcing our borders. It's more expensive from a police standpoint. It's more expensive from the standpoint of providing health care. And no country that cannot protect its own borders can protect its sovereignty. So Arizona was right to do this, and I support them.
I think it's important to ground all of our answers in the context of the Constitution. And keep in mind, when the Constitution was formed, our 13 colonies, our 13 states at the time were sovereign states, and they still are sovereign states. When we formed the national government, we did not give up our sovereignty, either as people or as states. And the fact that we delegated to the federal government the responsibility for border security, immigration, doesn't mean that the states gave up that right either. We wouldn't turn it all over to the federal government. And the suggestion by this Congress and this President that the people of Arizona are wrong violates their oath to those people. The people of Arizona should be affirmed for what they're doing. They shouldn't have to do this because Washington has got it wrong. They're more interested in things that is not within the Constitution, like health care, than they are about national security, which includes border security and immigration reform. We need to have secure borders, and we need to make that a priority. And if it takes sending National Guardsmen down along the border, that's what we should do. Because those people in Arizona deserve to be safe and free to live as Americans. And the fact that they're along the border should not put them at risk or in jeopardy. And so we should continue to help them and work with them, but not denounce them for doing what it is they should be doing to protect their own citizens. And on that issue, it's a fundamentally different issue. We're fundamentally different than we are with Paul Hodes, that's for sure. We can't afford to let Paul Hodes be the next United States Senator on this or any other issue, frankly.
Okay, unlike our Attorney General and our Director of Homeland Security, I have read the Arizona law. And I'll tell you, it's about 20 pages double-spaced, it's about 10 pages single-spaced, but it's a very important law, and I absolutely support what Arizona has done here, and anyone who reads it would actually understand that it's a very fair law as well. And if the federal government, and I'll tell you, if we had it happen here in New Hampshire, if we had a deputy sheriff almost murdered, if we had a rancher killed on his own property and then have his dog shot, if we had the second highest rate of kidnappings in the world, we are in America, then absolutely we'd be passing the same law here in the state of New Hampshire. And I support Arizona, and I'm glad that the president finally took time to meet with the Arizona governor. And I hope that he listens to her, because the federal government is falling down on its fundamental duty to keep us safe. And that includes securing our borders. We have to do that. We owe it to Arizona. We owe it to our country. We owe it to all of us to enforce our existing immigration laws, which we aren't doing right now. And it's penny wise and pound foolish that we aren't doing it. It's wrong, because if you think about the strain on our education system, our healthcare system, as a result of our failure to enforce our own immigration laws, it is not only wrong for our safety, but it's wrong in terms of the strain on our system and the people who are here to play by the rules. And we are all the sons and daughters and granddaughters and grandsons of immigrants. We all came here, our ancestors, but when they came here to play by our rules. Our ancestors came here and they learned English. I support English as the language of our country, and as part of coming here and playing by our rules. And people that want to come here and play by our rules, then we should absolutely, in an appropriate way that is consistent with our country, allow them to do so. But I can tell you right now, the people that are here illegally, I don't support amnesty. It's wrong. It's wrong to the people who are waiting in line here. We have waited for so long, and we need to stop that as well, because I think that's where the administration is heading next.
Thank you.
I was going to ask to let you sleep in their own bed, but I think I know that answer. I do too much of that. No, my question is more on the issue of cap and trade, and I think you're all familiar with that topic. The EPA is advancing a three-piece regulatory strategy to implement greenhouse gas emission regulations under the Clean Air Act. These actions have devastating consequences for the economy. And although cap and trade appears to be imperiled in the Senate for 2010, EPA actions remain the greatest threat to affordable energy and economic liberty on the horizon. Recently, Senator Lisa Murkowski from Alaska introduced a resolution of disapproval under the Congressional Review Act of January 21st, 2010. This resolution has 40 co-sponsors, but there are 3 Republican co-sponsors missing. The 2 Republican senators from Maine and the 1 Republican senator from Massachusetts. I believe Republicans must stand together to oppose the EPA's efforts to overtake the global warming issue from Congress. The EPA continues to be an overzealous, underregulated organization that is trying to hurt small businesses here in New Hampshire and across the country. With all that said, I ask you 2 questions. First and foremost, what would you do to reel in the overzealous EPA? And secondly, as you sit here today, will you make a pledge and sign it that says, I pledge to the state of New Hampshire and to the American people that I would oppose any legislation relating to climate change that includes a net increase in government revenue? Please.
A net increase in government. Is that a net increase in government revenue or?
That's right, the government revenue. In other words, so you would be taxing cap and trade is what the issue is.
Who's first?
I am.
I believe Owen is.
I'm using my time to sign the pledge, so I hope we answer the first question.
Your time may begin now.
Okay. You know, first of all, well, I'm up on this. First of all, this crowd in Washington has got it wrong again. They think by penalizing business, by using the stick of government, they can change fundamentally how we conduct businesses and how we live our own lives in America under the promise or under the theory of global warming. How about changing the focus to national security? Why is it that we send so much money overseas to purchase oil and other energy sources where we can exploit our own sources of energy here in America? Why is it that we're not using, in this case, we could use the tax code as an incentive for businesses and individuals to be more energy efficient? We should be encouraging good, sound practices, not forcing it on the people. And that's what this Congress and this president will do every time. And you're seeing it across the board. They're wrong in their approach, and they're wrong to use the argument of environmental protection to change fundamentally the structure of government. Structure of our economy and of people's lives. The reason we're not getting out of this recession, by the way, 41,000 jobs last month in the private sector, are you kidding me? 410,000 jobs through the census, that's what we're seeing. The reason we're down there is because there's too much uncertainty, too many threats to business and capital investment. We need to pare back regulations that get in the way of business development, and in the area of environmental regulation, we are our own worst enemy, frankly. We need to do an overhaul of both the laws and the regulations in that area, and I certainly would fight to do that. I want to be a senator who's known for the number of laws that were repealed, not the number of laws that were enacted, and the number of rules that are repealed as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please refrain from clapping, Tom.
I saw it, but I would say, first of all, I don't support cap and trade, and I think it's important that we actually rein in the role of the EPA, because the courts have extended the role of the EPA, and Congress has a responsibility to define very carefully what their role is, because otherwise they'll take even more of it as a result of the Supreme Court decision on this issue. So we have a responsibility there, and I would absolutely introduce legislation to do that and support legislation and/or resolutions that already exist to do that. And I'd be proud to sign the pledge that Corey proposed. Is it up there? It's right
It
there.
is, yes.
Happy to do it.
Thank you.
I'll sign the rest later because I want one more thing to say. How's that? Happy to sign the pledge, and I think, but what we do need to do is reduce our dependency on foreign oil. And the reason we do that is because it's good for our environment and it's good for our economy. And we don't want to continue purchasing oil from people that hate us. And that means using our own resources, natural gas and oil in this country. That means more nuclear power. We haven't put a new nuclear power plant online in 20 years. And the French get a substantial amount of their power from nuclear power. It means using everything within our power, conservation, and the best technology and clean energy. But there's no one energy source that'll get there. Cap and trade is just going to put all of our small businesses in a bad position, and it's bad for our economy. But we should reduce our dependency on foreign oil, and I will absolutely fight to do that, of using our own natural resources and cutting through the regulation to make sure that we can get new power plants online in this country.
Our entire government needs to be downsized, not just EPA, but EPA certainly is a good candidate for reducing the size of government. One of the things that's really been tragic about the mishandling of our economy is that despite the fact that our federal government has spent $1 trillion of so-called stimulus over the last 2.5 years, we continue to lose jobs by the millions and millions. And our economy just came up with an incredibly anemic jobs report yesterday, despite all the spending. And part of the reason is that businessmen can't predict what their costs are going to be. They can't predict what their tax rates are going to be. They can't predict what their cost of capital is going to be. They can't predict what their energy costs are going to be because of cap and trade. They can't predict what their labor costs are going to be because of card check. And they can't predict what their medical health insurance bills are going to be because of this obscenely big healthcare legislation. So if you can't predict any of your costs, what do? You stop. You do nothing. And that's what's stalling our economy right now. Now, as far as the concept of cap and trade to begin with, it's a terribly half-baked idea. You know, it's another scheme for the government to pull in more tax dollars. But you know, our federal government exists to handle crises like the one which we've experienced almost 7 weeks ago in the Gulf of Mexico. And it's tragic that our president didn't understand at the beginning of day one that this was his new #1 priority. It's tragic. He let 6 weeks go on where he was bashing Wall Street executives and he was resurrecting the debate about don't ask, don't tell. And only when the press started showing pictures of birds coming in soaked with oil did he decide, well, maybe I better get down there to the Gulf of Mexico and make an appearance at least. Well, our world, our economy has been harmed more in this last 6 weeks of government inaction than a century of carbon credits could ever correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm actually going to ask this next question, and then James is going to close us out for the afternoon. Picking up on that theme that Jim was just talking about, given the recent disaster with the BP oil spill, has that changed your view at all of offshore drilling? If so, how? And Kelly, I believe we'll start with you.
I think when it comes to what happened with BP, we absolutely need to get to the bottom of what caused this environmental disaster. And that has to be very important in doing that, and hold BP accountable and any federal agencies accountable if they have a role in what happened there. But let's not confuse that with our need to still look at developing our own energy resources. Let's find out what went wrong there, make sure it doesn't happen again, but we still have oil resources in this country that I would support, continue to support drilling with the information we get, but we can't not use our own resources as a result of what happened here. And so I continue to support that. I continue to support tapping our natural gas resources and other sources in our country to make sure that we reduce our dependency on buying oil from people that hate us.
You know, it's tragic that we have oil reserves in Anwar, which we're not even utilizing, and we don't have to drill below water to do that. We do need to understand precisely what happened. But regardless of what caused this accident or what could have been done to prevent it, we still know that oil tankers for decades have survived hurricane-force winds down in the Gulf, and they remain safer than tankers crossing the Atlantic. So we do need to better understand exactly what happened. Our government should have been on it from day one. Within 48 hours, they should have assembled all of the experts from the civil engineering world, from the petroleum engineering world, and also from the military. And the president should have, this is the role of big government. This is why big government exists, for precisely these moments. And our government, our president, should have insisted that bringing all these leaders together, I want to know all options within 48 hours. I want to understand what's the probability of success of each option, and what's the risk of failure of each option. That's what presidents are supposed to do. And unfortunately, it was just terribly tragic that so much time was squandered. And thank you.
I think the only thing I can say that has changed is my resolve to make sure that we do the best job we can to utilize, explore, and actually be able to recover our own energy sources. If we step back for a second, this is a tragedy, there's no question about it. It's a tragedy first because we had a loss of human life. 11 individuals were killed on that oil drilling rig. And moreover, we had this environmental disaster. Americans don't shut down because of disasters. And in New Hampshire, we're all too painfully aware of the shuttle disaster, which had a loss of life. But we didn't stop exploring space. We didn't stop the shuttle program. We took stock of where we were. We learned from the disaster and the tragedy, and we became better at it. And I think the same thing occurs here. We ought to continue with our offshore oil drilling exploration and production. And we ought to make sure we have a government that's ready to respond, though, and have a rapid response team. And one, by the way, that would be ready to move to relieve the rules and regulations that are impairing, for example, Louisiana, from putting up some barrier reef, artificial barrier reef to keep the oil from coming on shore. The governor's had a difficult time working with the EPA to deal with that, and the Army Corps of Engineers. We ought to have the ability of the president to move quickly, to navigate those rules and regulations in order to have an effective response, a rapid response. The president was AWOL in this. The president isn't the environmental commander-in-chief, but he is the commander-in-chief of our military forces. He has resources at his disposal. He should use them for our protection.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, the last question today, we're going to start with Jim. You've all spent countless hours away from your family, losing a lot of money, in some cases giving money to this cause, based on the premise, I would assume, that you believe you're the best person to be the next United States Senator. Forums like these are about distinctions. So for a closing question, why you and not the others running? Jim.
Well, I'm a leader. I'm not a lawyer. My business has been to fix broken, bankrupt, dysfunctional organizations, and I've been doing this for 25 to 30 years. I have a lot of experience in this regard. I understand, I think better than any other candidate, the issues that result in businesses creating jobs and also losing jobs. I also feel I have a far better understanding of economics, finance and accounting, and the history of what works and what doesn't work in terms of stimulating our economy. I know a lot about Washington, D.C., not because I've been a bureaucrat or a politician, but because my business has taken me to Washington for decades, and I've worked with the Congress at close hand. I believe that I know how to bring about smaller government. I know how to get a hand on the corruption that I think cripples our government, and I think doing these two things, which stimulate our economy and bring job growth to America and also New Hampshire. These are the things that I think distinguish me and make me a better candidate. Thank you.
I take it this is our last question. I want to thank you, gentlemen, for serving as a fine panel and organizing this, particularly the Americans for Prosperity and Cornerstone. They're wonderful organizations working to fight for conservative values that resonate with the people of this time. And I'm privileged and honored to be a candidate among a fine field of candidates. I thank them, Kelly and Jim and Bill and whoever else is interested in getting involved. It's not easy to put your name on the line. and to sign up and to be subject to public scrutiny, to stand for your positions. But I'm the only candidate in this race who has any kind of track record that you can look to as a leader in the conservative movement, as a candidate who stood on conservative principles. And I invite you to look at our platform when I ran for governor in 1996 and won a primary when I was not expected to win. The choice in this election is fundamentally to reverse course in Washington. The primary process is designed for the people to nominate that candidate who can best represent our Republican platform. I was the chairman of the Republican Platform Committee. I stand on that platform, all parts of it. And I'm the best candidate, given my experience both as a worker in the conservative movement and my experience in the community, to represent the party and to take on Paul Hodes. I will present a stark contrast to Paul Hodes, the starkest contrast on every issue. And the voters in November need to know that there are stark differences. Big government, more overreaching government, more deficits is Paul Hodes' recipe, and ours and mine is yours. Small, responsible government, states' rights, individual freedoms and liberties. I ask you to join our team, and I thank you for your attention this afternoon and being here to participate. Thank you.
I'm a prosecutor, I'm not a politician, but you've seen my record. I'll stand up with courage and conviction, and my record is one where I've actually gone and led by example. When we had a police officer murdered in the line of duty, I went into the courtroom myself and tried it as Attorney General. When we had a case where our parental notification law was challenged, I took it to the United States Supreme Court over the governor's disagreement because I thought that was my duty under the law, and I argued the case myself. When the state was facing a budget crisis last January, we're talking about layoffs, every department had to schedule to get a 5% increase. I didn't take it. That had nothing to do with running for this office. It had everything to do with leading by example. I didn't think that was the right thing to do when we were talking about the people of New Hampshire. They weren't getting pay raises. And I will tell you, what we need in Washington is tough, new, conservative leadership to stand up to the forces that want to have government be the answer to all of our problems, to get us away from the Constitution. And I absolutely will stand up with courage and conviction to get results for you in Washington. And that's why I stand forward. I'm running for Senate. I have 2 children, and I'll tell you, I want to make sure that we follow through on the promise we've always made. And that is to make sure they have the same opportunities that we have had in this great country. But they're not going to have it if we don't balance our budget, if we don't have a smaller, more accountable government that adheres to the Constitution. And that's why I'm running, and I'm going to get results and listen to what you have to say, and I hope that you will support me. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you all very much on behalf of James and Corey. I just want to thank you very much for participating in this forum today. I think it was very informative for our audience. I want to thank our audience for coming. This is such a great crowd we have here. I'm glad so many people took their time on a Saturday afternoon to come and listen to these candidates. And how about just giving them a round of applause?